You wake in Britain after Rome, with cold mist on your face and damp grass beneath your hands. Below you, a village is breathing smoke into the morning, small and quiet in the valley. It looks peaceful enough, which is exactly what makes it fragile. The sky above is pale, the fields below divided by low stone walls, and the thatched roofs are still silver with dew. Sheep move slowly on the hillside. A dog crosses between the houses. Nothing in the valley seems grand, or ruined, or legendary yet. Only old, only living, only waiting. For a moment, before your thoughts gather properly, the world feels almost too quiet to belong to history at all. The air is sharp and damp, touched with the smells of wet earth, sheep, and wood smoke. The mist still lies low in the folds of the land, hiding part of the village and softening the rest. It is a beautiful sight, though not in any polished or noble way. The beauty here is smaller than that. Rougher. A valley still half inside the night. A handful of roofs. Thin smoke rising. A land that looks as though it has learned to keep going without asking to be admired for it. You push yourself upright and look again. The village sits gathered close together, not spread wide in confidence, but held in a cluster, as if warmth itself were part of its design. The houses are low and rounded, their roofs heavy with thatch, their walls simple and practical. No tiled villas, no straight Roman streets, no public grandeur. Whatever this place once inherited from empire has already been weathered down into something more local, more fragile, more alive. A voice beside you says, "The good news is that we're still here." You turn sharply. An old man stands a little way off, leaning on a wooden staff, as though he had always been there, and you had only just become worthy of noticing him. His cloak is thick wool, faded by years of weather. His face is lined, but kindly so. Not soft exactly, more like shaped by patience. He is looking down into the valley rather than at you. And when he speaks again, his tone carries the calm of someone who has outlived surprise. "The bad news," he says, "is that being still here has become harder." He tells you his name is Camelot. The name sits easily in the morning. So does the man himself. He does not feel like a dramatic guide sent to explain history to you. He feels like part of the land, weathered, observant, and not in any hurry. Once, he says, he worked as a stonemason on Roman buildings, when Roman buildings still mattered in the old way. Now he mends what needs mending. A wall, a path, a hearth edge, whatever the day asks. You stand beside him and follow his gaze back into the valley. From above, the village still seems calm. Smoke rises from roof holes and drifts sideways in the cool air. The fields around it are cut into modest shapes, less by geometry than by use. Sheep graze the slopes. Somewhere near the edge of the settlement, one figure passes from house to house carrying something under one arm, perhaps wood, perhaps a tool, perhaps bread. At this distance, everything looks small enough to fit inside one gentle thought. But Cadoc's words have shifted the scene. Now you notice how the village sits slightly higher than convenience alone would require. How the fields are broken into cautious pieces. How the open land around the valley feels less like freedom than like warning. It is not that the place looks warlike. It does not. It looks watchful. The Romans went, Cadoc says, and we did not. He says it simply. No grandeur. No bitterness sharpened for effect. Only fact. For near 400 years they ruled these lands in one way or another. Built roads, raised walls, brought their laws, their coins, their baths, their writing, their taste for straight line. He gives the faintest smile at that last part. Then the legions were called away. Emperors had other troubles. Rome began pulling back into itself, and Britain was left to remember what it was without Roman protection. He points beyond the valley, somewhere your eyes cannot fully follow. There are roads still, good ones, Roman ones. Some old towns too, bits of walls, pieces of villas, stones from buildings finer than most people here will ever live inside again. We use what we can. Why waste good stone? But roads are one thing, soldiers are another. The air moves around you both, carrying the smell of damp grass upward and hearth smoke sideways across the slope. A bird calls from somewhere unseen. Far below, a gate opens with a small sound lost almost immediately in the mist. You ask him whether life is worse now. He takes his time answering. Different, he says first. Smaller, harder in some ways, simpler in others. Fewer goods from abroad, less pottery from Gaul, less wine, less oil, less of everything that used to arrive already made and ready to use. More must be grown, spun, repaired, shaped by hand. He pauses, but people still eat, still marry, still bury their dead, still bring children into the world. That has to count for something. It does. That may be the most important feeling in the whole scene. Not ruin, not collapse, not barbarian chaos the way later people would lazily imagine it. What sits below you is not the end of Britain. It's Britain in a more careful mood. A world still functioning, only without the confidence it once borrowed from Rome. Britain had not become empty after Rome, only more fragile. And from this hilltop, in the mist and the low morning stillness, that fragility feels almost visible. Not in broken towers or smoking ruins, but in smaller things. In how tightly the houses gather, in how thin the smoke looks over the roofs, in how the beauty of the valley carries a faint tightness beneath it, as though the land itself knows peace can no longer be taken for granted. Caddock shifts his weight and begins to walk toward the path that leads down the hill. Then he glances back, and there is something like dry humor in his eyes. "Come along," he says. "It's one thing to look at Britain from above. It's another to see how people manage to live in it." You follow him. The grass is wet against your boots. The mist thins as you descend, and the village slowly sharpens into separate things. Fences, roofs, low walls, moving figures, waking animals. The first full signs of labor beginning. Somewhere bread is already near the fire. Somewhere a child is being called in from where they have wandered too far. Somewhere an old Roman stone has been fitted into a very un-Roman wall, because usefulness survives where luxury does not. And down in the valley, that fragile life was already beginning its ordinary day. And down in the valley, that fragile life was already beginning its ordinary day. By the time you and Caddock reach the first of the cottages, the village is fully awake in the quiet, practical way that poor places always are. A woman is already shaking a cloth free of dust near one doorway. Somewhere farther off, a child is laughing for reasons too small to matter beyond the moment. A dog noses along the edge of the lane, hopeful for scraps. From another house comes the unmistakable scent of warm grain and smoke, and Caddock turns toward it at once with the air of a man who trusts both his nose and the kindness of old friends. "Branwen will have bread," he says. "Or if she doesn't, she'll know why that's a problem better than anyone else here. Her house stands slightly larger than some of the others, not grand, only steadier somehow, better kept, more often visited. Even before you step inside, you can sense its importance. Not because it belongs to a chieftain or warrior, but because people pass in and out of it with the ease reserved for places where help is often found. The doorway is low, and when you duck inside, the whole room receives you at once. Warmth first, then smell, then shape. A central hearth burns low but constant, not a great roaring fire, just the persistent heat around which a life can gather. The floor is packed earth, hard and swept, marked by the long, patient use of many feet. Smoke rises in a lazy column toward the opening in the roof, though some of it lingers below, softening the rafters and darkening the air with a familiar haze. Around the walls stand simple benches, storage jars, hanging bundles of dried herbs, wooden bowls, tools, folded cloth, and the small practical things by which an ordinary household holds itself together. Branwen is kneeling near the fire when you enter, turning a flat loaf at the edge of the heat with hands that seem too calm to waste motion. She looks up, and her face changes immediately at the sight of Caddock. There is affection there, but not surprise. In villages like this, people are always entering one another's days in small necessary ways. She is older, though not fragile. Her gray hair is braided neatly back. Her dress is plain wool, darkened at the hem by work, and a cloak hangs nearby from a peg in the wall. Around her neck, a small cross rests against the cloth of her tunic, and yet on a shelf behind her stand bundles of plants tied in the old manner. Charms or remedies or both, depending on who is looking and what they most need to believe. This one found the hill before breakfast again, she says, glancing at Caddock. It's where the best thoughts still are, he replies. And the dampest grass, that too. It is the kind of exchange old friends make when they have long ago stopped trying to impress one another and settled into the more useful habit of recognition. Then Bronwyn looks at you. There is curiosity in her gaze, certainly, but not alarm. If your clothes, your face, your manner seem odd to her, she chooses not to begin there. Instead, she reaches for the loaf, tears off a piece while it is still warm, and places it in your hand, as if this settles the more urgent question of who you are. The bread is coarse, heavier than what you know, made of barley rather than fine white wheat. It smells faintly sweet, even before she reaches for a small jar and drizzles a little honey across the torn surface. The honey catches the morning light from the doorway and glows amber for a moment before sinking into the grain. You take a bite, and the taste is warm, plain, good in the way that food becomes good when it is made close to the fire and eaten while the day is still young. No one here would call this a feast. That is part of what makes it feel so safe, because nothing in the room is pretending to be more than it is. There is no luxury, no excess, no polished Romanese lingering in corners. Only warmth, bread, smoke, work, and enough calm to let a body unclench. Bronwyn settles onto a bench near the hearth, and Caddock does the same with the ease of one who belongs. You sit near them, and from this angle, the house seems even more completely itself. One large room serving as kitchen, sleeping place, workroom, healing room, and shelter from weather all at one. No separate chambers, no corridors, no private little worlds divided by doors. Life happens here in one shared volume of air. At night, people sleep along the walls on pallets stuffed with straw or wool. By morning, those same spaces become places for mending clothes, minding children, preparing food, and receiving neighbors. Nothing is wasted, not even space. That is one of the first lessons of a post-Roman village. Life has narrowed, and because it has narrowed, it has learned to use everything. Bronwyn asks no direct questions at first. She simply tells you what the room is already saying, if you know how to listen. The clay jars by the wall hold grain, dried peas, maybe some salt, if the village has been fortunate in trade. The bundles above the bench are fever herbs, stomach herbs, plants for women in labor, plants for sleep, plants for bleeding, plants for wounds. The wooden bowl near the hearth has been mended twice, and will likely be mended again before anyone thinks of replacing it. The wool cloak folded beside the bed space was woven in this village, dyed with plants gathered not far from the stream. The finer things come less often now, she says at last, as though picking up a thought you did not know you had already begun. She means Roman things, though she does not say Romans immediately. The good pottery from the continent, the oil that once came in jars, the glass vessels, the red tableware, the small luxuries that travel brings to stable worlds. But people still need bowls, she says with a small shrug. So we make bowls. They still need cloth, so we weave it. Children still split their heads. Women still bear babies. Old men still wake stiff in the rain. Rome leaving didn't change the body much. There is dry humor in that, but also truth. This is what the room is teaching you. Empire may leave. Trade may thin. Administration may weaken. roads may grow lonelier. But daily life does not wait for political clarity. Before continuing, someone still has to grind the grain. Someone still has to patch the tunic. Someone still has to know which herb cools a fever, and which one helps a mother survive the hard turn of birth. Bronwyn is, clearly, one of the people who know such things. You can feel it in how Caddock speaks to her, in how the room is arranged, in the way others begin to appear at the doorway while you eat. A woman with a child on her hip pauses to ask whether a rash should worry her. An older man leaves a small bundle of something, roots perhaps, or dried onions, in quiet exchange for some earlier kindness. A boy appears only to be sent back out again with instructions to tell his mother not to boil the leaves too long this time. No one makes a ceremony of Bronwyn's status. That, too, is revealing. In more formal ages, power likes to name itself loudly. Here it often survives by usefulness. She matters because she can help, because she remembers, because she has seen enough births, fevers, cuts, coughs, and griefs to become part of the village's deeper structure, the sort built not of timber, but trust. As more of the morning gathers, so do more detail. You notice the clothing more clearly now. Wool tunics and dresses, plain, but not without care. A cloak pinned with a brooch that might once have been Roman in style, though now worn by someone who never saw Rome. Colors made from plants, not bright, but alive, muted blue, brown, faded green, yellow darkened by use. Leather shoes near the doorway, repaired many times. A belt cut from hide, polished more by hands than by craft. This is not a world of abundance, but neither is it a world without beauty. The beauty is quieter than later storytellers would prefer. It lives in good bread, in woven wool, in a well-tended fire, in a room arranged so that every useful thing can be reached without fuss, in the way honey turns coarse grain into something briefly luxurious, in the way smoke and warmth and low voices can make a modest room feel like enough. Life had grown smaller after Rome, but not lifeless. That is the truth at the center of the house. The world has shrunk, yes. Its distances feel greater, its goods fewer, its protections thinner. But the room still holds warmth. The loaf still breaks. A healer still knows her herbs. A village still knows where to go in the morning when someone needs bread, advice, or steady hands. Outside, the day is strengthening. Through the doorway you can see the lane more clearly now, the mist lifting from it in soft layers. A pair of children hurry past, one barefoot, one not, both carrying something that looks too heavy until you remember how early usefulness begins here. From farther off comes the low ring of hammer on metal, the blacksmith beginning his day. Somewhere a hen bursts into sudden outrage over nothing at all. The ordinary world is in motion. Bronwyn tears another piece of bread and gestures with it toward the door. "Eat while it's warm," she says. "Then go and see the rest of it. Bread is one thing, a village is another." Caddock rises with a soft sound in his knees and gives the hearth one last glance before stepping back into the morning. You follow him out, carrying with you the warmth of the room, the taste of barley and honey, the smell of smoke in your clothes. And once the morning meal was done, the village returned to the work that kept it alive. And once the morning meal was done, the village returned to the work that kept it alive. This is where the place begins to make sense. Not from the hill, where it looked beautiful and fragile in the mist. Not only from Bronwyn's house, where warmth and bread made everything feel briefly held together. But here, in the middle of the morning, when each person turns back toward the thing their hands know best. The lane has changed since dawn. It is no longer full of waking. It is full of purpose. A woman sits outside her doorway with a broad wooden bowl between her knees, grinding grain between two stones in slow, heavy circles. The sound is dry and steady, one of those sounds so old and so useful that it seems less like noise than part of the world's own rhythm. Beside her, a small girl watches, then is given a little grain to grind herself. She presses too awkwardly at first, and the flour comes out uneven. No one scolds her. She is learning the way children learn here, by being brought near what matters until what matters begins to live in their hand. Farther along, two children are gathering eggs from beneath complaining hens. Near the byre, a man bends to check a loose gate hinge. At the edge of the settlement, two others are working on a roof, pulling out tired thatch and laying in fresh reeds with the economy of people too used to the task to waste motion or words on it. Beyond them, sheep are already being pushed toward rougher pasture where the grass is thin but still worth taking. Kadok stops near a stretch of fence and crouches beside it with the serious attention of a man who understands that weak things become larger problems very quickly. Everything fails slowly, he says, not looking up, until one day it seems to fail all at once. Then, after a moment, he adds, "Fences." You smile a little at that, but only a little, because he is not really joking. The village is full of that feeling now, not collapse, but maintenance. The world has not ended. It has to be held together. That is different, more tiring in some ways, more ordinary too. A house stands because someone patched its wall before rain got in. A field feeds a family because seed was saved, ground was turned, weeds were pulled, grain was cut, and nothing useful was wasted. Life here survives less by strength than by repeated attention. A young man near a timber shed lifts a hammer from beside a forge and nods at Kadok in greeting. "This is Garin," Kadok says. "If the plow breaks, if the hinge splits, if the knife edge gives out, he's the one everyone begins thinking about." Garin laughs softly at that and wipes one hand against his tunic before reaching for the iron heating in the forge. He is broad through the shoulders, with soot darkening one side of his face and forearms marked by little old burns that no longer deserve notice. His work today is not glorious. A broken iron fitting from a plow, worn nearly useless, and now being made serviceable again. "My father showed me," he says. His father showed him. Some of the old tricks came from men who learned from Roman smiths. Some are always ours. He says this without ceremony, but the sentence stays with you. That seems to be the shape of post-Roman Britain everywhere you look. Not Roman, not untouched, by Rome. Not new, not old. Something lived in between, though no one here would ever say it that way. They would simply say that if a thing works, you keep it. And so they do. A word remains. A tool shape remains. A way of setting stone remains. A habit of boiling water before cleaning a wound remains. Clasp design. A road. A prayer. A practical method no one has reason to discard. Nothing survives here because it is elegant. It survives because it is useful. Brenwen's healing is like that too. When a boy arrives later with a cut across his palm, she washes it with the calm of someone who has seen far worse and expects to again. She binds it neatly, adds crushed herbs, and tells him not to be foolish enough to reopen it before supper. No speech, no mystery, only useful care. Yet somewhere in the way she handles cloth, water, and wound, you sense several worlds lying quietly together. Older herbal knowledge, habits learned from Roman practice, the same steady human wish to keep pain from getting larger than it already is. The village does not pause to think of itself as living after empire. It simply lives. That may be the truest thing in it. Histories written later will use large words: collapse, transition, fragmentation, decline, all true in their way. But none of those words are what the girl with the grainstone is thinking. None of them are what Garand is thinking as he lifts the hammer. None are what the boys driving sheep upslope are thinking, or the woman twisting wool into thread, or Kadok tying new strength into an old fence. They are thinking, this must be done. Then this, before dark, if possible. And perhaps that is why the world still holds. Children move through all of this as naturally as smoke through a thatched roof. One moment they are laughing, the next carrying water. One moment chasing a hen, the next holding a basket, turning a spindle, sorting grain, fetching wood, keeping smaller children from straying too near the fire. No one announces that childhood is ending and usefulness beginning. The two live side by side from the start. Not cruelly, simply early. The same is true of knowledge. A boy knows how sheep move because he has always been near sheep. A girl knows when dough has been worked enough because she has watched hands do it for years. An older child can spot which eggs will crack easily, which herbs are safe to gather, which fence post is beginning to rot near the bottom, because none of this belongs to lessons separated from life. It belongs to life itself. Beyond the worked strips of land, the forest waits. From the hilltop it looked dark and distant. From here it feels more immediate, almost like another household, larger, less predictable, but no less necessary. Caddick names what comes from it in the same practical tone Garin used about iron. Firewood, dough, hazel rods, nuts, honey, dot, game if luck, and skill align, berries in season. Mushrooms, if you know which will feed you, and which will remove the need to worry about tomorrow entirely. The forest gives, but not gently. Then again, almost nothing in this world gives gently. The fields give only if they are worked. The sheep give only if they are tended. The forge gives only if someone keeps the fire properly. Even bread, warm and safe in Bronwyn's house, begins in labor most people never stop noticing. And yet the village does not feel joyless. That matters. Hard life is not the same as empty life. Garin makes some remark about Caddick taking longer with the fence now, because old men mend with memory as much as with rope. Caddick answers that at least he remembers a time when Smith still respected iron before hammering it flat out of impatience. The children nearby laugh at the tone, if not the full meaning. Bronwyn, passing with a bundle of herbs over one arm, tells them both they would be more useful if they talked less. Neither obeys. There is very little luxury here, but there is enough steadiness for humor, enough repetition for competence, enough shared need for people to fit together through work. What survived after Empire was not luxury, but useful life. You feel that truth more and more as the day stretches forward. Useful life in grain ground by hand. Useful life in a roof patched before rain. Useful life in herbs hung to dry. Useful life in a boy learning the gate latch. Useful life in a forge, a fence, a flock, a loaf. The world has narrowed, yes. Fewer fine goods, fewer distant ships, fewer imported comforts, less certainty in everything beyond the valley. But the core remains. Food can still be made. Wool can still be spun. Iron can still be worked. Children can still be raised into skill. The village can still keep itself alive. By afternoon, the rhythm deepens into something almost soothing. The grainstones go on turning. The sheep move in slow white patches across the higher grass. From Garin's forge comes the low measured ring of hammer on iron, never hurried, never idle for long. Somewhere behind you, hens complain again, as if the whole shape of the world has offended them personally. The smoke above the village lifts and thins, and lifts again. No single thing here is grand enough to become legend. And yet, this is the deeper life beneath every legend that comes later. Before the king, before the battle, before the bard enlarges memory into myth, there is this: a lane, a fence, a forge, a child learning by doing, a village held together by many small acts of usefulness repeated until they begin to feel like the natural order of the world. The stones keep grinding, the sheep keep grazing, the hammer keeps its patient rhythm, but even this ordinary life had learned to keep one eye on the horizon. The village lies nestled at the foot of the hill, calm and seemingly protected by the land itself. But as you look closer, you start to notice the little things that tell a different story. The village sits higher than might be necessary. The houses are arranged in tight clusters, not sprawling carelessly. Stone walls rise around the settlement, low but sturdy, and you see that they do not just mark property boundaries. They also mark something else, something subtle but important: a defense. There are ditches around the fields, banks of earth, thick and compacted by years of work. You can almost feel the history in these walls, the layers of effort put into securing this land against the forces that could take it away. The people here know the earth, but they also know the importance of watching it, guarding it, not just using it. The land may be fertile, but it is not enough to trust in simply the soil. Overhead, the sky is clear, but you still sense a weight, like something waiting in the air. Caddock, standing beside you, looks out over the village and then toward the hills that stretch farther to the east. He does not need to explain why the land looks different now. The Roman world is gone, and with it, the organized defenses of empire. What was once a more defined protection is now nothing more than a fading memory. From here, Caddock says quietly, you can't see much of what waits, but you can see the land's edge, where the grass starts to thin and the forest lines grow dense and unruly. You can see the shift, the small but distinct difference in the landscape that points to a world beyond. The Saxons from the east, the Picts and Scots from the north, the endless movements of people and forces outside this village, never fully at peace with what remains. Roman soldiers once stood here, guarding roads and pathways, ensuring nothing moved unchecked. Now that world is gone, and the paths remain, but they are less certain. The land is no longer an unbroken whole. It is cut by borders that mean little beyond the boundary stones. Behind each stone, something else waits, something dangerous, something not entirely known yet. Caddock's voice breaks your thoughts. This place is safe for now, but that safety has to be worked for. The Romans knew how to make it last. We don't know how long this will last. You turn to him, sensing more in his words than a simple statement. His expression is grave, but it is not fear. It is a steady understanding of someone who has seen the edge of safety before and knows how quickly it can unravel. People in the village still work, but not carelessly. They work as if they are aware that this peace, this rhythm of life, is fragile. There is no idle luxury here. There is no thinking the day will pass as it always has. There are tools to be sharpened, walls to be mended, and fields to be worked. In every movement, you can feel the knowledge that things could change. That, outside this small and steady rhythm, there are threats. There are other people, with other ways of thinking, who move through the land. They do not stop for courtesy. They do not stop for care. The wind blows softly over the ridges, and you hear the distant call of a herder driving his flock toward the village. But the call is different now. The edge of the land feels different. Everything has become more purposeful, less comfortable. The real danger, Caddock continues, looking out to the horizon, is not that we will always be attacked. It is the knowledge that we could be, and we don't know when. You stand still for a moment, considering his words. In the distance you can see the barest hint of movement on the hills beyond. It is not enough to be called a threat yet, but it is enough to keep the village watchful. The danger in Dark Age Britain lived not in constant battle, but in the knowledge that peace could end quickly. That was the essence of life here. You look back down into the valley. The village seems unchanged, quiet, safe. It seems like it always has, a place where people work steadily, where life moves at its own pace. But there is something in the air now, something small but powerful, that makes you see the village with new eyes. It is still alive, yes, but it is no longer simply alive. It is alive and, waiting too, waiting for something unseen to come over the horizon. The wind picks up slightly, ruffling the grass at your feet. The sound of a hammer rings from somewhere in the village, a reminder that the work continues, unbroken. And yet, it feels like something else is waiting just beyond the land. Something unseen, but always there. The village settles back into its quiet rhythm. The people going about their day, their movements steady and sure. But the quietness is not complete. It has changed. Something is coming, but no one can yet say exactly what. And then, just as the village settles into that uncertainty, news arrived on horseback. The day had unfolded like any other, until Bedware returned. He came on foot, his figure outlined in the haze of dusk as he approached the village. His cloak, worn but sturdy, caught the wind as he walked, and his boots left faint marks in the dirt road that led into the heart of the settlement. Word spread quickly. People, who had been going about their usual tasks repairing fences, mending clothes, bringing in the last of the harvest, dropped what they were doing and turned toward the path. As Bedwyr neared, a low murmur of voices began to ripple through the village, the usual quiet of evening disturbed by curiosity and the undercurrent of something else, something that made the air feel thicker. He arrived at the small gathering place by the hearth, where the fire had been built just before sunset. Bedwyr stood for a moment, his heavy breathing marking the space between the moment of arrival and the moment of news. He was not a large man, but there was a weight to him that came not from size, but from the events he had witnessed and lived through. His eyes met those of Cadoc, who, standing nearby, gave him a nod to signal that he had an audience. "It's over," Bedwyr said simply, though his voice carried the tremor of a long journey. "We've won. The Saxons. We've beaten them back." The villagers exhaled at once, as if holding their breath had been part of the battle. It wasn't the kind of victory that would end the wars or bring peace to the land, but for the moment, it was enough to turn worry into relief, and that relief felt almost like a gift. The weight of tension had been lifted for now, and there was nothing to do but breathe and thank the gods that they had come through. As the news settled into the villagers' hearts, the firelight seemed to grow warmer. The hearth crackled, and there was a stir in the air as people began to gather closer, bringing with them bowls and platters, prepared for a small feast. It was a simple thing, a feast by necessity, not celebration, but it was enough. They had survived another day, and in a world where survival was always uncertain, that counted for something. The men broke out in quiet song, their voices low but steady, and the sound of the harp joined in, filling the space between their words. The firelight danced, and the smell of roasting geese wafted through the room, carried on the warm air. The village, in the moment of relief, settled into an easy rhythm. Children, who had been running through the fields earlier in the day, now lay on the floor, curled up in blankets and drifting into a quiet, tired sleep. Their dreams would be safe for the night, and that, in itself, was a rare thing. The news of victory had come not in the form of a battle cry or a parade, but in the quiet presence of a man who had walked from one end of the village to the other, and the village accepted that, for now, it was enough. But there was a deeper undercurrent beneath the joy. The village had heard the name before, in hushed whispers during the hardest days, and it had carried a different weight. Bedwyr, in his simplest words, had reminded them that there were no certainties. Not even victories were guaranteed. Before Arthur became legend, before he was crowned with the name that would echo through centuries, he had first been a name used by those who had to imagine something more, something larger, something worth fighting for. The relief in the village did not rest on that name alone, but the seed was planted. Before Arthur was a king, he had been a possibility, the faintest outline of something they could not fully see yet. The evening stretched on, with the flickering firelight casting shadows against the walls of the cottages. The smoke from the feast began to settle in the rafters, mingling with the warmth of the hearth. The village, for a moment, allowed itself to believe that peace was possible, and as the quiet settled in, the children's soft breathing and the sound of a distant goose settling on its perch were reminders that even in the toughest of times, life still continued. There would be other battles, other days, but tonight, for a few short hours, the village had found a fleeting peace. The morning breaks gently, the air still cool with the remnants of night. The valley, quiet in its morning slumber, is already stretching away. Bedwyr and Gaun are ready to leave, their horses packed and waiting, their saddlebags filled with only what's necessary food for the road, tools for the journey, and enough warmth in their cloaks to keep the cool at bay for a while. The path out of the village is a simple one, winding between the low fields and past a few scattered cottages, some still quiet, some with signs of life beginning to stir. The road here is not paved, not by any Roman measure, but it has its own rhythm. The earth is packed and solid, worn by years of feet, hooves, and wheels. And while the land is not as smooth as it once was under Roman rule, it still moves with a quiet strength, as if it knows the way forward. As you walk, the sounds of the village fade behind you. The last traces of morning are carried on the breeze, and soon you are surrounded by trees, tall and quiet, as they close in on the path. The road is a trackway, not wide, but wide enough for the horses to pass. It follows the stream that cuts through the valley, its sound gentle but constant, like a soft whispering of the land itself. The trees are thick here, the canopy overhead, a delicate weave of branches that filters the light into soft, dappled patterns on the forest floor. It feels like stepping into a different world, one where time moves more slowly, where the noise of the village seems very far away. Caddock walks with a steady pace, as if he knows these woods as well as he knows the back of his hand. His eyes are scanning the path ahead, but his mind is elsewhere, perhaps reflecting on the world beyond the village, beyond the quiet rhythm of everyday life. His words come slowly, but there is a depth to them, as if he is choosing them carefully. The herbs grow better here, he says as he bends to pluck a sprig of rosemary from the edge of the path, for healing, for cooking, for keeping the air clear in the winter. The springs are older than Roman hands can remember. You follow his gaze, watching as he holds up the sprig, turning it between his fingers. The scent is sharp and earthy, and for a moment you find yourself lost in the simple act of being here, of moving through this place that feels both ancient and alive. The world beyond the village, the wider world that Caddock speaks of, seems like a distant dream when you are surrounded by this quiet wilderness. The path narrows as the trees grow denser, their trunks thick with age. The horses step carefully over roots, their hooves making soft thuds against the earth, and the sound of the stream becomes louder as you near a small crossing. There is a calm here that matches the steady beat of the horses' steps, the rustling of the leaves above, the occasional call of a bird in the distance. Murden's presence is still a shadow in your mind. His name was mentioned back in the village, spoken of with a certain reverence, but little more. Caddock, for all his years of walking this land, has not yet said much about the man. The hint of something greater seems to hang in the air, like the faintest outline waiting to be filled in. As you cross the stream, the horses' hooves splashing in the cool water, you realize how much you have come to rely on the landscape around you, on the quiet rhythm of the road. This world, though shaped by human hands, by the marks of time and toil still, carries something unbroken, something that moves quietly beneath the surface. The road to Arthur's world ran through ordinary Britain, Caddock says, as if answering the question that had been lingering in the back of your mind. Not through magic, not through prophecy, just ordinary people making their way in a world that shifts beneath their feet. His words echo softly as they settle into the quiet of the road. There is no grand vision here, no thunder of destiny or great event unfolding, just a world being shaped one small act at a time, one road, one stone, one life at a time. The trees begin to thin as you climb a low rise. You can see the valley opening up again, the horizon stretching ahead, and in the distance, the first signs of the hill fort that will later come to be remembered as Camelot. The land around it is rougher, wilder, but it feels different now, more real, more grounded. It is no longer just a part of the story waiting to be told. The village behind you has already faded from view, but the memory of it lingers, as if it will always be there, quietly holding its rhythm even when the world outside begins to change. By evening, the place later memory might have called Camelot came into view. By the time the road had led you and Caddock to the hilltop, the landscape had changed completely. The earth had risen sharply beneath your feet, and the view below, once soft and manageable, had become a vast expanse of land, wild and untamed. Here, at the crest of the hill, the world felt different. The air was thinner, colder, and the land stretched away beneath you like a sea of green and brown. The view felt full of potential and history, though neither was visible in the simplest way. It was not a place that had been built with ease. nor a place where life had flourished without hardship. This hill, this stronghold, had been made with hands that understood the necessity of defense, the urgency of survival. The hill fort of Cadbury stood before you, partially obscured by the sweep of the land, but undeniably present. Earthworks formed a rugged wall around the summit, built with the same utilitarian craft that had defined every aspect of life since Rome's absence. The palisades, made of sharpened posts driven deep into the earth, rose high enough to make the stronghold feel almost impenetrable from a distance. The wooden gates, reinforced and braced, could have stood against any small raid or attack. Here, there was no easy Roman architecture, no graceful stonework or paved roads. The walls were raw. Buildings were functional, not ornamental. This was not a place of luxury, but of strength, survival, and careful planning. Within the fort, the pace of life was not so different from that of the village you had left behind. The walls were thick with the smell of earth and wood, and the smoke from cooking fires curled lazily up to the darkening sky. The air inside the great hall was heavy with warmth, the scent of roasting meat, and the low hum of conversations that drifted like shadows along the walls. The torches flickered in their holders, casting dim light on the faces of men who had gathered together not to dream of heroism, but to keep the place alive. The stronghold was not crowded with warriors in shining armor, nor did it hum with the tension of a kingdom's court. Instead, it was home to a practical community, a place where every man had his role, every woman contributed, and every child learned their place in the rhythm of survival. The walls were lined with wooden beams that had been shaped by the hands of those who knew how to make them last. The hearths crackled as meals were prepared, and the sound of grinding stone could be heard in the background as the day's work continued. Murden, whose name had come up frequently in conversation, stood near the fire, talking with a small group of men. His age was clear, his beard long and weathered, but his voice carried the weight of experience and wisdom. He was the advisor, the man who had seen and learned from all the years of uncertainty. He spoke not in grand terms, but in practical counsel advice meant to keep people safe, to make the most of what was available, to ensure that the stronghold remained a place of refuge and not of chaos. Artorius too was there, but he was different from the legends that would later speak of him. He was not yet a king, not yet crowned by the myths that would follow. He was a leader, yes, but not in the way the bards would later write of him. He was the kind of leader who saw problems not as challenges to be met with force, but as obstacles to be solved through careful planning and steady resolve. His decisions were made in the best interests of the stronghold and its people, not for the sake of his own glory. And around him, there was a small council of trusted advisors, many of whom were there not for their bloodlines or military prowess, but for their practical knowledge. The Round Table, that later emblem of legend, had not yet taken shape, but the seeds of it were already here. Men gathered to discuss, debate, and make decisions that would affect the lives of everyone within the fort. The logic of the circle was simple. No one man could make all the decisions. It was through counsel, through conversation, through sharing responsibility, that they would survive. The council's discussions were not about the epic struggles of kings or battles that would be remembered for centuries. Instead, they were about the everyday decisions of living, how to grow enough food to feed everyone through the winter, where the next raid might come from, how to keep the walls strong, how to make the best use of the land around them. There was no magic here, no prophecies of greatness. There was only the slow, steady work of keeping a place alive in a world that was slowly becoming more uncertain. The world outside, beyond the stronghold, was dangerous and unpredictable, and this small community had learned, by necessity, how to build something that could last. What happened inside these walls was not the stuff of legend, but it was what allowed legend to grow. The fire in the hearth crackled louder, sending a shower of sparks into the air as the evening deepened. The villagers gathered around, listening to the low murmur of voices, the clink of cups, the sound of a harp being tuned in the corner. This was not the noise of victory, it was the noise of survival. And in the heart of it all, There was Artorias, not yet a king, not yet a legend, but already shaping the world with every practical decision he made. Camelot may have begun not as fantasy, but as a defended hilltop world full of work, counsel, and survival. The torches on the walls of the hall flickered, casting long shadows across the faces of the men who gathered. The smoke from the hearths filled the room, and the crackling fire softened the edges of the stronghold, turning it into a place of warmth and security. And as the night settled in, the stronghold did too, resting under the weight of its own existence, of its quiet resilience. Inside the walls, there were no grand speeches, no promises of glory. There was only the steady, quiet hum of people doing what they had always done, surviving. The quiet comfort of the stronghold was what allowed the world beyond to remain stable. In time, people would come to see it as a place of legend, a place where great men met their fate. But for now, it was a place where life continued, one day at a time, one decision at a time. And once the hall had quieted, the harder reality behind the legend became clearer still. The morning is still dark when you wake, the air heavy with the chill of the night that has not quite loosened its hold on the land. The camp is quiet, save for the soft rustling of horses and the low murmurs of men who have already begun to stir. In the dim light, the smell of porridge and weak ale rises from the fire, its warmth pushing back the cold that lingers in the early hours. You move slowly, stretching the stiffness from your limbs, still half dreaming of the night's rest, knowing it wasn't quite enough. The cold of the earth beneath you seeps into your bones, but the work of the day is already pulling you into itself. You reach for your leather gear, its rough surface familiar, its weight comforting. It's not much, but it's yours, the tools you need to survive another day. As the camp stirs to life, you notice the warband preparing with quiet precision. The men move about their tasks with the ease of a routine that has been honed over countless days and nights. There is no noise, no hurried clamor to get ready. There is only the steady rhythm of work, the sharpening of swords, the tightening of leather straps, the checking of shields, the feeding of horses. Every action is purposeful, every movement an instinct learned from years of living on the edge of danger. Across the ridge, you see the others observers on the lookout, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. The land around you is both vast and familiar, and in this quiet waiting moment, you can't help but feel the weight of the responsibility that comes with leading such a group. The safety of everyone here is dependent on the alertness of the scouts and the discipline of the warriors. By the time the first light of day touches the horizon, the warband is ready to move. You ride alongside the others, the horses' hooves making soft thuds on the earth, their breath visible in the cold air. There is a rhythm to the way the warband moves, not rushed, not frantic, but with the fluid grace of something that knows its purpose. As you reach the ford, the water running over the rocks is clear but swift. The horses pick their way carefully across, the sound of the water filling the air, a brief distraction from the weight of what lies ahead. On the other side, the land opens up, and the ridge ahead looks barren, yet full of the silent promise of conflict. The shield wall forms quickly. Men fall into their places, the cold metal of their shields gleaming faintly in the morning light. The sound of metal clinking against metal is the only noise that breaks the stillness, but even that is brief, swallowed up by the weight of the land and the tension that fills the space between each breath. The battle comes not with a roar, but with the sudden clash of shields and the grunt of men pressing against one another. There is no fanfare, no call to arms, just the relentless push of bodies and the urgency of the moment. The fight is not one of glory, but of survival, of holding the world together long enough for the next day to come. As quickly as it begins, it ends, and the silence returns. The men are weary, their faces set with the understanding of what has just passed. The real cost of battle is not the clash of swords, but the aftermath, the wound care, the exhaustion, the slow quiet that follows when the blood has been wiped away and the dead counted. The camp settles into a new rhythm. The fire burns low, and the men who are able gather around it, tending to wounds, applying healing herbs with hands that have done this before. There are no cries of triumph here, no boasting, no celebrating. Just a quiet acceptance that life continues because it must. The camp grows still as the evening wears on, the air thick with the scent of burning wood and the soft rustle of blankets being laid out on the ground. The low murmur of exhausted voices fills the air, but even the conversation feels like an effort. A way to push back against the weight of the day's work. The fire flickers in the dark, and as the night deepens, the warband settles into its slumber. But even in the quiet, you can feel the tension lingering, like a low hum in the background, a reminder that the world they have created here, this fragile, hard-earned survival, is constantly on the edge of something else. A danger that may come tomorrow, a struggle that may last a lifetime. But for now, the warband sleeps, and the fire continues to burn. Once the fighting was over, memory began doing what it always does. It turned the battles into stories, and the stories into legends. The battle had ended, and the men who could still stand were gathered around the campfire, their faces marked by the weariness of a long day. Among them stood Artorius, not as a figure of myth, but as a man who had earned his place among them, not with the flash of a sword, but with the quiet weight of respect. The scars he bore, like those of the men who had fought beside him, were not marks of glory, but of survival. His presence was steady, not imposing, yet it commanded more attention than any loud declaration ever could. His reputation had grown not from a single act, not from a single victory, but from the way he had led. When the men were weary and the odds seemed impossible, it was Artorius who made the hard decisions, who listened to his people, who cared for the wounded with the same attention he gave to his men in the field. He did not demand respect. He earned it with every decision, with every word spoken in the heat of battle and the silence of recovery. Artorius was not born a king. He was not born a legend. He was born of two worlds, the Roman and the British, both of which had shaped him in ways no single man could fully understand. He had Roman blood in his veins, and yet he lived among the Britons, understanding their ways, their struggles, their stories. He saw the world with eyes that could bridge the gap between the two, a man who could speak the language of empire and the language of the land, and somehow find the balance between them. His leadership was not forged in the courts of kings or the training halls of generals. It was forged in the fires of battle, in the quiet moments between fights, when the men gathered around the fire, sharing stories of their homes and their families, of what they had lost and what they still hoped to find. Artorius listened. He did not dismiss the fears and hopes of his men. He understood them, and in doing so, he became more than just a leader of warriors. He became a leader of people. The bards would come later, after the battles, after the blood had been washed from the land, and they would take the stories of Artorius and shape them into something larger than life. They would turn the quiet moments into great epics, the simple decisions into legendary acts of heroism. They would create a man who was not just a warrior, but a king of myth, a man who could pull a sword from a stone, a man whose name would echo across centuries. But even in the moments before the bards arrived, there was something in the way Artorius held himself, in the way he spoke to his men, in the way he moved through the world, that suggested something greater, something enduring, something that was already beginning to grow into legend, even before anyone had the words to describe it. Arthur, as he would come to be known, endures in memory not because he was unreal, but because reality already contained the kind of leadership that people could not bear to lose. His story was not created by poets, not invented by time. It was built into the world from the very beginning, forged from the decisions he made, the battles he fought, and the men he led. He was the embodiment of what people needed, a leader who could see beyond the struggle, beyond the bloodshed, and into the future. The name of Arthur, like the name of many others who had come before him, would be transformed by the storytellers into something much larger than life. But the true power of his story lay not in its exaggeration, but in its roots that were planted firmly in the soil of everyday life, in the world where people lived, fought, and struggled to survive. And so, as the night stretched on and the camp settled into its usual quiet rhythm, Artorius sat among the men, tired but at peace, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the fire. The sound of a harp began to fill the air, and with it the first notes of a story that would soon be told across the lands. The bards would come, but not yet. For now, this was the beginning. The stars hung low above the camp, and the sound of a quiet song filled the air. Horses shifted restlessly in the stables, but the night was peaceful. Tired men lay in their bedrolls, their bodies worn but their minds still alert, listening to the soft murmur of the world around them. And as the fire burned low, it became clear that the story of Arthur was not simply one of battles and victories. It was a story of a man who understood the weight of leadership, who carried the burdens of those who followed him, and who, in his quiet way, had become the symbol of something greater than any single man could ever hope to be. The morning light filters through the trees as you walk back through the village, following the tracks that have been carved into the earth by countless feet over the years. The Roman influence, once dominant, still lingers here, but it is no longer the defining force of life. Instead, the remnants of the empire exist beside the new, like faded echoes of a past that can never fully fade. Roman ruins, once grand, are now part of the landscape, repurposed into homes, walls, and even graves. Roads, once paved and straight, are still walked, but no longer with the certainty of Roman discipline. They have become worn and uneven, as if the earth itself is slowly reclaiming them. The village is full of this duality, this mixture of old and new. The influence of Rome still lingers in the language, in the tools, in the way the land is worked. But alongside it there are the signs of something different, something British, something born from the land itself. The people here have not forgotten the past, but they are learning how to live in a world where the empire no longer has the power to hold everything together. Christianity, which has begun to take root, is not the only belief in the village. The old ways still have a place in the hearts of many, woven into the daily rhythms of life. The village healer, Bronwyn, mixes herbs with prayers that echo both the Christian liturgy and the older, more pagan rituals. The bards who gather by the fire at night speak not only of the saints but also of the old gods, of the heroes and monsters of the past. The stories of the old world are not discarded. They are reinterpreted, integrated into the new faith, making it something uniquely British. Women, healers, craftsmen, and bards are the backbone of this culture. They are the ones who carry the old knowledge forward, who weave the threads of the past into the present. Their work is not celebrated in the way that kings and warriors are, but it is essential. The fabric of life here is built, not on grand battles or heroic deeds, but on the steady, unnoticed work of ordinary people. Trade, too, has diminished. There are fewer goods coming from the continent now, fewer luxuries, fewer fine cloths, fewer imported wines. But trade is not gone entirely. The local market still thrives, though it is smaller than it once was, and it deals not in the grand exchanges of the Roman world, but in more modest goods. The land is worked by those who know how to use it, and the craftsmen still fashion tools, weapons, and pottery from the earth and metal they have at hand. The education of the young is done through apprenticeship and memory, passed down from one generation to the next, through the words of the elders and the actions of the young. The Britain you are seeing now is not the same as the one the Romans left behind. It has changed, yes, but it has not become a dead world. It is a world in transition, a world that is learning how to live without the certainty that the empire once provided. There is no more empire to hold everything together, but there is still the land, still the people, still the stories. This is not a world of despair. It is a world of adaptation, a world where new ideas are mixed with old, where faith is redefined, and where life continues not in the absence of empire, but in the creation of something new and uncertain. Dark Age Britain was not a dead world after empire, but a mixed world learning how to live after certainty. It was a place where the old and the new could coexist, sometimes in tension, sometimes in harmony, but always in motion. And that motion, that constant shift between past and present, would shape the legends of the future. The fires in the stronghold burn low as night settles over the land. The sounds of the day fade into the quiet hum of the evening. The men and women of the village gather around the hearth, sharing food and stories, their voices low and tired. The smell of roasting meat lingers in the air, and the flickering light of the fire dances on the walls. The board games are brought out, and the children's laughter rises for a moment before the quiet returns. This is the life of Dark Age Brittany. Life that is far from perfect, but far from hopeless. A life that has learned to adapt, to survive, and to remember. And in that remembering, the seeds of legend are sown. And from such a world, legend would begin carrying truth in a softer form. As the evening settles over the stronghold, the fire burns low in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across. The faces gathered around the hall. The air is thick with the smell of burning wood, and the soft hum of life winding down after a long day's work. The men and women of the village have gathered, as they do each night, to share food, stories, and the comfort of knowing they will live to see another day. Among them, the bard stands, his fingers gently strumming a harp as he begins to sing. His voice, though quiet, carries the weight of generations in it, as if it holds not just the words of a song, but the very essence of what it means to be remembered. The song begins simply, with a description of a great battle, one that the villagers know well. But as the bard continues, you realize that something is changing. The details shift, subtly at first, but more clearly with each line. The hero who once led the charge now becomes a king. The advisor who stood by his side takes on a new name, a name that carries more weight than any real person could. Merlin. The council of warriors becomes the round table, the seat of legends. The hill fort that once stood as a symbol of survival becomes Camelot, a name destined to be remembered forever. What is happening here is not just the retelling of a story, it is the creation of a myth. The bard is not recounting a simple history. He is reshaping it into something larger than life, something that can survive the passage of time. The facts of the battle are not as important as the feelings they evoke, the courage, the unity, the sense of destiny that filled the hearts of those who lived through it. As the bard sings, the village hall feels quieter, not just from the music, but from the collective understanding that something larger than their everyday lives is beginning to take shape. The real world behind Arthur's story, the one of battle, struggle, and survival, still exists, but it is fading, slowly giving way to the legend. But the legend does not erase the real world behind Arthur. It preserves what that world had felt like to those who needed it remembered. It carries the essence of their struggles, their hopes, their triumphs, and their fears, and it transforms those raw, unpolished moments into something more enduring. The bards will continue to weave their stories, shaping and reshaping them as they pass from mouth to mouth, from generation to generation. The real Arthur, the man who once led his men with quiet strength, will be buried under layers of myth and legend. But the spirit of that world, the world of hardship, hope, and survival, will remain. The fire burns lower now, and the harp's notes seem to grow softer, the embers crackling quietly in the hearth. The children in the corner listen intently, their faces lit by the warm glow of the fire. The soft rhythm of the music, the quiet hum of the hall, all blend together into a feeling of peace, of connection, of something that has lasted longer than any single person or event. It is in these moments that the legend becomes more than just a story. It becomes part of the fabric of the village, part of the landscape, part of what it means to live in this world. The truth of Arthur's deeds, his struggles, His victories may never be fully known again, but the feelings, the essence of his life, will be remembered for as long as the song, or as long as the fire burns in the heart. As the song fades into the quiet of the evening, there is a sense that, despite all the hardship and transition, the legend has already begun to shape the world in a new way. The people of the village, like the bards, are part of something larger than themselves, and in that there is comfort. As evening falls over the stronghold and the village, the light softens, casting long shadows across the fields and houses. The firelight inside the cottages flickers, and the smell of evening meals fills the air, mixing with the cool evening breeze. The quiet settles over the village, a quiet that feels comforting, even as the weight of the past day lingers in the air. The land seems to breathe deeply, as if exhaling a long-held sigh. The day is winding down, but life continues. People are still baking bread in small ovens by their doors, the scent of warm dough mixing with the fresh earth. Some are repairing tools or mending the fences that keep the animals in their pens. Others are teaching children how to weave or how to sharpen a knife, passing on the skills that have kept this village alive for generations. The hum of ordinary life carries on, slow and steady, like the rhythm of the earth itself. The children, their faces still flushed from the day's work, gather around the hearth as the night draws closer. Their voices are low, their words soft as they listen to the elders' stories. These stories, passed down through the generations, are not the grand legends of kings and battles, but the smaller tales of survival, of keeping dignity, knowledge, and community alive in uncertain times. It is through these stories, told in the flickering firelight, that the past is preserved, not as myth, but as memory. Arthur is not yet the legend he would become. He is a man, a leader, not in the way the bards would one day sing of him, but in the quieter, more humble way that life requires. His greatness is not in battles won, nor in the power of his sword, but in the way he led his people through difficult times. His leadership was not about glory, but about the endurance of everyday life. It was about listening, about understanding, about holding the community together when everything around it seemed uncertain. Arthur's greatness, then, was not born in a moment of victory. It was born in the small moments that made up the lives of ordinary people. The strength to keep going when there was no clear path forward. The quiet resilience that kept the village from falling apart when the empire had crumbled and the future seemed unknown. In this sense, Arthur's leadership was not extraordinary. It was exactly what people needed to survive. As the night deepens, the sounds of the village slowly fade into the background. The stars above the hill fort begin to appear, each one a small pinprick of light in the vast darkness. Far off in the distance, a dog barks, its voice a lonely echo against the stillness of the night. The wind stirs gently through the thatch of the cottages, carrying with it the soft scent of earth and smoke. Inside the houses, the people settle in for the night, their breathing slow, and even as they drift off to sleep. In this quiet, in this stillness, the true weight of the village's life is felt. Not in the triumphs, not in the legends that would later be told, but in the simple fact of survival. In the way people held on to each other, held on to their traditions, and held on to their dignity, despite everything. This is the world that Arthur helped lead, and this is the world that would carry his name into legend. But as the legend grew, as the songs were sung and the stories were told, the quiet moments of everyday life began to fade into the background. What later generations remembered as Arthurian greatness may have begun as something quieter. People not waiting for glory, but working to survive. And that, perhaps, is the true power of the legend, the memory of a time when leadership was measured not by the size of one's sword, but by the depth of one's care for the community. The wind rustles the thatch, and the village settles into the rhythm of the night. The stars, distant and cold, look down on the world, while inside the homes, the people sleep, their bodies still from the work of the day. And in that quiet, the people behind the legend remain more moving than the legend itself.